Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 48th episode of Tech Life Skills with Tanmay. Thank you very much for joining in today. My name is Tanmay Bakshi, and on this series, as we've covered all different perspectives of technology, I feel like there are a few things we've been able to uncover. And one of those patterns is that technology has many different faces, right? Like there's the developer face, there's the business-facing end of things, there's the consumer-facing end of things, and there's so many more. But what's really interesting is where all of these different faces really intersect. And you get to see what happens sort of in the middle of all of them. And so while we have covered quite a few of these faces individually, actually, on the series, I feel like we haven't delved deep enough into those actual intersections between the faces. And to dig deeper into this is exactly why I've invited a very knowledgeable special guest today on the show, and I'm very honored to have him on. His name is Thiago Cesar Rotta, and he is the Worldwide Data and AI Program Manager at Microsoft. He's also an IBM Master Inventor with 16 patents and has over 14 years of experience in customer-facing roles, both from a business and a technical perspective. And so, without any further ado, let's go ahead and welcome Thiago to the show. Hi, Thiago. How are you? Thanks for joining today.
Hey, Tanmay. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm glad to be here and really share my experience and with the community and with you. I feel honored, really, with all the knowledge that you said that I have. So happy to be here and happy to share.
Thank you very much. I'm really glad to have you on the show, and I'm very excited for our discussion. And of course, again, anybody in the audience, joining live, make sure you send in your questions through the live stream chat, and we will make sure to cover it. All right, now to start off, Thiago, I do want to know a little bit more about you. What do you do? How
Okay.
did you get here? And then let's dive into the world of AI.
All right, that's great. Thank you. So, like you said, I am one of the worldwide data and AI program managers, and my team is the solution strategy team at Microsoft, which is basically the team that is responsible for leading the business and the technical direction of our strategy in data and AI across the globe. What I basically do is that I interface with teams across Microsoft, such as engineering, services, sales, and we as a team, we produce programs and solutions that are aligned with what the market and the customers really need. So using that process in which we have programs across the different organizations to build what we call as a feedback mechanism where that will actually help create the next generation of our solutions as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a long journey for me, right? I've been at Microsoft for a little longer than 3 years now, but I've had a strong career at IBM before. So I've stayed with IBM almost 12 years, 11
Wow.
years and 11 months. And the experience was really a university because I started in services as a software engineer, stayed there for 5 years or so, and then I moved to post sales. And after 3 years in post sales, I just decided, well, I got the experience in services and I got the experience in post sales. So what is next? So I thought, oh, pre-sales and sales. So let's learn on sales side and how we technically say sell something to the customers. And I've stayed there and I had a lot of fun. That was a time when we I was actually personally involved with the IBM Watson creation, right? The organization in which we brought the organization from US to Brazil for the first time
Mm-hmm.
outside of US. And after a few years at IBM, 12 years almost, I just decided, I need to find something that is going to continue to make me learn and grow professionally. And opportunity just came up to be the director of innovation and digital transformation at Microsoft, and that's it's adding more knowledge to my career. And after a near 9 months, I think, on that team, I just look at my career, and look at the past, and am a very career oriented. And I started thinking, I had that experience in services, post sales, sales. What next? What are the gaps? What I don't know really that I need to learn more about? And I just found that I need some of the corporate strategy, knowledge, and that's the reason why I moved to this team for now. So it's really demands you a thought process of where you are and where you want to be,
Mm-hmm.
so you can really design the way and how you're going to move towards throughout your career.
That's very nice. That's actually something that I really enjoyed about your story is that you're always looking for that next thing to do, right? I feel like so many people
Yes.
sort of say, you know what, I'm good at this, I'm just going to keep doing this, right? I'm
Yeah.
really good at developing code, so I'm just going to keep writing code for the rest of my life. But, you're always looking for that next thing. I'm good at services, now
Yeah.
let's do sales, right? Like,
Exactly. And I remember, Timmy, when I was in services,
Mhm.
and I think that I was the only software engineer that was working on a particular team. And when we start growing our team and receiving new software engineers, I was just looking at me and seeing, wow, these other teammates, they're way more smarter than I. So, but I was still learning, and I was like, you know what? I need to find my niche on those things that you master and you do, as better as you can. And I just found that, among my teammates, I was the one that was actually mastering the communication
Mhm.
skills, right? I was the one that was actually driving the stuff that my team was doing and going in front of the leadership and showing this is what we're gonna do to really change the way on how we do business.
Mhm.
I was the one that was stepping into and going to customer conferences and position our solutions to the customers. And as a software engineer, I just found that wow, this is a passion that I have. So I should maybe start thinking about should I use this more often and then move to a new career. So
Mhm.
there are some point in time in our career where you start seeing that wow, I do that very very well. I'm not doing that in a smart way, and there are other people that do that better than I.
Yeah.
So why don't I explore those other strengths that I have? So and that's what I've been doing.
I like that a lot, right? It's not
Yeah.
just saying, this is what I've decided to do in my career and just sticking with it. It's really
And
evolving and
no,
figuring out, no, I'm
exactly.
really good at this, I'm passionate about this, and that can evolve over time, right? That can change. And so I think that's definitely really important, something that everybody should keep in mind as advice for their career as
Yes.
well.
Yeah. For sure. For sure.
Wonderful. Now, I do want to start off getting a little bit deeper into the world of AI, and I know that we'll be getting deeper into this as well in just a moment. But to begin, let's talk a little bit about AI from the enterprise perspective. I know that back in, like, for example, 2014, when sort of AI was just kicking off and lots of companies were starting to apply artificial intelligence and figure out what it could be used for, and it was like this brand new thing. Even when neural networks were practically in their infancy, one of the most famous applications of AI, right? One of the most popular, just standard applications of it was chatbots. And to this day, still chatbots are a pretty prevalent use case for artificial intelligence. It's one of those things where, if you go to a hackathon, a lot of the times if you're developing AI, you'll be implementing a chatbot. A lot of companies, their first stepping stone into applying AI is, hey, can we automate support or something of that sort? Or at least a portion of it, right? And so I
Right.
want to
Right.
ask, these chatbots, are they still as common as they used to be? What has the evolution been? Have we realized that, hey, maybe we shouldn't be applying it as much as we thought we should, or is it actually the opposite? Are people really doubling down on working on it? And apart from that, apart from just chatbots, what do you think the most sort of common application or use case of AI today actually is?
That's great. Yeah, I see your eyes actually shining when you talk about the chatbots because I remember when you're just little, you were not that big right now, right? So you were just little and you start getting into that word and showing how you can develop chatbot very quickly and deploy that on a platform. And I think you actually motivate a lot of people on, wow, I'm gonna get into that technology and start implementing chatbots. And
Thank you.
that's one of the reasons why chatbots start, being one of the common use case. But getting back on the enterprise, I'd say that chatbots continue to be, a very popular use case these days as a way to experiment the benefits that AI can bring to you. And the reason is very clear. It continues to reduce, like you said, operating costs, for example, right? It can automate some tasks that we were used to do manually. So it can help even people find more information, very quickly and increase the customer satisfaction, for example. There are few researches that show that by I think it is 2024, the consumers, us in retail, will be spending hundred of billions of dollars through chatbots. So, and that's one of the reasons that chatbots gonna remain alive. in some extent, right? There are other research that I was reading the other day, and that one was talking about, I think by 2020, 23, right, in a couple of years, over 10 billions of dollars could be saved across industries, such as, main industries like retail, financial services, healthcare, just because of chatbot implementation.
Mm-hmm.
But truth to be told, that I'd say very simple chatbots are not really capable of holding a conversation and being more personalized. Those might not really survive on down the path.
Mm-hmm.
So chatbots are evolving to more sophisticated implementations. Instead of being purely implemented across channels such as web pages, apps, or even messaging platforms, there is a strong trend really pushing that particular use case for implementation that can be more present, I would say, in our day-to-day, life, such as chatbots in cars,
Mm-hmm.
houses, appliances, or even, that ability to connect. That's going to be interesting, to connect bots with other bots that might have the knowledge that the initial bot doesn't have. Think about, the way on how we as human beings, we work.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know, something, and you might think that Thiago knows that, why don't you just go and ask Thiago,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I don't know how to answer to you, but I tell me I don't know how to answer that, but I know who knows that.
Mm-hmm.
I go to that person, grab the knowledge, and then I go to you and say, here's the information that you were looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be some interesting, implementations around chatbots, and there is a very interesting use case around chatbots that are being implemented in objects, which has become very popular. There is that case particularly from BMW. I don't know if you know that, in which they have implemented what they call as intelligent personal assistant in the car. Have you seen the ad of them?
Unfortunately, no, I have not.
That's very interesting. And I'm going to give you a little bit of story what just happened to me.
Uh,
It is that case in which you don't see, oh, I just, you see those person assistant, they're just talking to us all the time. So, it is that a function that they've implemented in the cars in which you interact with the car by asking questions or giving commands to the car.
mm-hmm.
And I remember when seeing this particular video on YouTube, and my daughter was just approaching my computer, and she started paying attention to one part of the ad that it shows a girl speaking with the car and giving a nickname to the car. Instead of saying, "Hey BMW," you can actually give them a name. And she was like, "Hey Joey," right? And she asked something like, "Can you put a music for me," or things like that. You can even just say, "Hey Joey, I'm just tired," and then the car really switched the functions of air conditioning. It closed the windows, and start some functions to decrease the level of noise from outside in, and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. So it is very interesting, because the little story that it give it to you is that when I was in a car later on that day with my daughter, she was like, "Hey Daddy, can you open it up the window?" And I said, it's too cold. Sorry about that. I'm not gonna open because it's really too cold. And she said, "Hey car, can you open the window for me?" And it was like, I cannot believe that. So I was actually playing the bot function and just opening the window, and she felt that it was cold, really. And she said, "Hey car, can you close my window? Thank you." And I just closed. So regardless of whether or not chatbots will stick around for years,
Mm-hmm.
right? I do believe there is one thing that will never change in research when it comes to AI capabilities, which is that ability to personalize experiences. And that's where the chatbots are going through.
Right. I feel like chatbots in particular, I mean, first of all, the example that you gave is really
It's
incredible.
simple, but it
Yeah,
talks to the start to the technology, right?
exactly.
It's interesting to see.
It shows you where that technology is best applied. But I feel like a chatbot is one of those pieces of technology where it's very easy to apply, but it's relatively hard to apply right. Yes.
Oh, yeah. No, that you were right. Yeah, you were right. So some people might think that, wow, so I'm gonna stick with the chatbots. I've been in conversations with customers for a long time, and where the customer just came to me, can we implement a chatbot on this so I can automate, my operation? And it was like, we can, of course we can, but it takes time. But I want to give you, the chance, because you've been implementing these things for
Mhm.
quite a long time. So I want to see, your experience, and then we can discuss that.
Yeah, for
Tell me,
sure,
tell
for
me a little
sure.
more.
I mean, really, what my experience with chatbots in general has been is that they're very easy to get started with because of fundamentally the way that they work, right? You can come up with a conversation flow, you have an idea of the different things your users will want to do, and you can essentially train the chatbot. These are my intents, these are my entities, this is my dialogue flow. Getting started with a chatbot is really easy. But because the barrier of entry is so low, I feel like there is just so much noise in the chatbot space that it's hard to extract the signal and see what's genuinely useful. I was on a call just yesterday with somebody, and we were discussing. I actually had a keynote that I was working on, and this is something that's pre-recorded keynote for an event. And as part of that keynote, I was talking about chatbots and how they can be an incredible, for example, tool in support. And the guy that I was on this call with, and we were discussing this keynote, he was like, "But I hate it when a bot answers my phone call or my support message." And I was like, "That's because you haven't been using the right bots, right? It's because
Exactly.
you're interacting with the companies that are like, hey, let's just take the same old, like, the little not necessarily bots, but the little menus on the phone where it's like press 1 to do X. Let's take
Right.
those and put those on a bunch of buttons and text on a screen, right? Like, for
Right.
example, I believe on like Facebook Messenger, there's a bunch of bots where they'll give you a question and they'll give you like 3 possible canned responses, and you've got to click one, right? That's why
Yeah,
use a
that's a
chatbot at that
decision
point,
tree, right? That's
right?
a
Yeah,
decision tree. It's not
yeah,
really using the natural language processing capabilities
exactly,
that you just talk about, entities and intent. So yeah, that's
exactly.
well, on my experience, Tommy, I'd say that deploying a chatbot and picking the components that are really primarily used for a chatbot is really easy. And the cloud platforms has allowed us to really do this stuff very quickly. You deploy those objects into the cloud, and you start having those functions already available for you. But the hard part of chatbot is really about training the content,
Mm-hmm.
because not only you need to pick those common questions that because you were SME on the area, that people you ask for, but you also need to know the nuances that people ask a particular question. And when I discuss that with the customer, I've been involved with bankings and universities and manufacturing, in which they were developing the front end of their customer interaction through the chatbot. And to give the best experience ever to the customers, to the end users, it takes time, because you need to train on very specific subjects that you know exactly what they are looking for.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know and you just put some few questions in there and answers, you most likely gonna have a poor experience with
Mm-hmm.
the end users. And there is a tricky that the other day I was just discussing that with one of our customers, and he said, when you say about nuances on questions and answers, what do you mean about it? And you have like maybe 5 to 10 different ways of asking a question,
Mm-hmm.
right? And especially when you think about channels where the chatbot's gonna be working on, people behave in different ways.
Yeah.
Usually, if the chatbot is on the web, you're gonna write more. If it is on a mobile, you're probably going to want write just few words,
Mm-hmm.
right? Maybe just a couple of words, and you want the bot to really know more about you. So it takes time. I'm going to tell you that if you take about a few hours to deploy the chatbot components, it's going to take you another 6 months to 9 months to train really a good chatbot and put that out there.
Absolutely.
So it really depends upon your the way and how you build the ground truth.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a fact, right?
Yeah.
So
And I also think that actually to expand upon your point, I also think that there's a difference between how people behave and how businesses think people will behave, right? So like for example, there's Ubank in Australia, and I still very clearly remember I was at a Watson Summit in Australia, and I was
Yeah.
doing a keynote on like artificial intelligence and stuff, and we were joined by an executive from Ubank, and he was also speaking at the event. And he was talking about how they were deploying a chatbot to Ubank for I think it was mortgages,
Right.
and they were talking about how they did it in two stages. One was the initial slower rollout where they started to gather some like data from their actual users and noticed that the stuff they trained it on was nowhere near as exotic as the way people were wording their queries. And then there was a larger rollout where they actually said, okay, now we've got the data, let's do a bigger rollout. And so, what really stood out to me was, first of all, to your point, the fact that
Yeah.
people word and say things in very, very weird ways,
Yes.
especially at scale. But then also that because people knew they were talking to a bot, of all the questions, the two most frequently asked ones weren't even mortgage related.
Uh-huh.
They were, "What's your favorite color and will you marry me?" So,
That's true. That's true. Well,
so
not to lie, that's gonna show up in, I think, in every single bot implementation. That's true.
exactly.
That's interesting.
And so you
That's
somehow have
interesting.
to make it so that your bots understand not just the domain, but even things outside of it as to not break the immersion immediately, right? So
That's true.
it gets complex.
That reminds me, even the process of retraining the bot, right? Because people think like, okay, you're gonna train a bot. I got these 10 variations of one question on which I think that people you're gonna people will ask questions to that particular answer in different ways. So if I train that and I have like 50, 500 different answers, is that enough? Not exactly, because
Mm,
that's really dependent upon on how your bot is going to perform and behave with the customer, right? With the end user. And implementing a feedback loop in which you capture, the way and how things are working between the user and the chatbot, it's really important.
mm,
Because if you see that the majority of the questions that people are asking, it's nothing related to what you actually have in the ground truth,
mhm.
maybe you need to change that. Actually, you need to change that, right?
Yeah.
Or if the accuracy of the answers or the feedback that the users are giving, like thumbs up or thumbs down, it's not really well positive, you probably need to change the way and how you were giving an answer. I've been in cases where the customer said, you know what, we are giving the right answer to the end users, but they are saying like they didn't like that. And it's not that the chatbot's not giving you the wrong answer. It is just because of that perception that the end user, he or she doesn't like the answer. Maybe it's too complex. Maybe it's not complete, right? It is incomplete answer. So working towards these things to really make sure that we have a good implementation, chatbots, and even think about implementations like in a car, right? You,
Mhm.
you don't want the car to perform the wrong functions, especially on commands, right? Where it changes like lights or open the window.
Yeah.
Think like if you were in the middle of a really strong rain and then the car just understand that you want the windows to be open, so
Yeah.
that's going to be a mess, right? So these things really, it's gonna give the users a wrong perception and a poor experience. So we need to pay attention on how we retrain the model.
Right, absolutely. And actually, towards this point of retraining the model, there's a question from Seema Verma on LinkedIn that I want to get into. But just really quickly before I do that, I do want to quickly say that maybe a good analogy for, maybe if you're unfamiliar with like, the world of chatbots, a good analogy I think actually would be facial recognition on mobile devices. Because it is very easy to just go to GitHub and download a facial recognition neural network and just plop it onto your iPhone or
Wow.
your on your
Yeah.
application. But it's
What a
really
risk.
difficult to get it to be
Yeah.
robust and something that users
Yeah.
want to use, right? Like what, for example, Samsung had done with iris recognition in the past was clunky. It barely
Hmm.
worked. You could trick it with pictures of someone's eyes, and you had to position your eyes with the little circles on screen, and it was a mess. But
Yeah.
then, if you really spend the time to think about it from a user's perspective and see how they use their devices and how you can make it robust, then over time you can develop something like Apple's Face ID or Windows Hello, where it's actually robust and users want to use
Yes.
it because it's easier for them to do so than to not use it, right? It makes
Right.
sense, right? So similarly
Yeah.
with chatbots, you want to make it so that it understands the kind of verbiage that your users give them on just a general daily
Sure.
basis. That's
Yeah.
that's that's the idea, and also, of course, then tying that into the whole user experience perspective of making sure you're not using a fallible AI system to do or to do certain actions that could be life threatening, like for example, controlling road
Exactly.
functions in the car. So it's all about
And
balancing it.
that's the reason. Yeah, and that's the reason that enterprise they need to understand that it takes time. Not only they think sometimes at the first place that deploying the components will take a while, but it's not deployment of the components, right? It is actually the training. You don't
Mm-hmm.
want to release something that's gonna give a wrong perception of your brand,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the majority of the time when I have discussions like that with different companies. I'm very serious about that. I look in the eyes of people and say, you don't want a wrong perception of your brand with your end customers,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that's going to open up the space for competition. And the executives are, whoa, no, 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 no. Yes, so that's the reason that you need to understand that it takes time to train and make sure that you have a robust system running on your back end to serve your customers. And that takes few months to get it done, not hours, not days. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
100% agreed, right? There's always this sort of disconnect between the development of just little AI components and pieces and then actually putting them into real applications. It's absolutely possible to roll a functional chatbot in a couple of hours, but is it something that your users will want to use and actually reflect your brand image properly? Probably not. It's something that's going to need a
yeah,
lot more time to really
exactly,
deploy.
exactly, exactly.
Right. So now I do want to answer Seema's question finally. Thank you for
Mm-hmm.
asking. This one is, what is the progress around exposing APIs to share the critical information stored by chatbots and improvement towards governance processes to connect chatbots hosted outside of organizations?
Wow, that's a it is progressing. I think anything related to how you expose the critical information via APIs, it's something that the companies are still being very careful, right? Because they don't want to get the messy stuff that they have internally outside.
Mm-hmm.
So that really depends on the strategy that we have, that a company really has around the involvement of their chatbots in the market, in their industry with their customers. So I'd say that I'm not seeing a lot of customers doing that for now. But what usually happens when we talk about how we better train the models, how we get to the fact that things might not be working and the customers need to do something about it. They usually have what they call as a center of competence on inside of their organization. And what they do is that they work internally instead of exposing that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
as they work internally, they improve, and then they might be exposing that later on. So that really depends on the strategy that the companies really have.
Right. It really depends on the overall direction that you have with your company and the data that you gather and what you want to do with it. Do you want to contribute to the community? It
Exactly.
depends, right? So,
Yeah, and I tell you, the strategy of the companies across different industries, they're not the same.
mhm,
They you might think, wow, everyone is really following the lead, and that's not necessarily true.
yeah.
Uh, they have different requests. They have different users. Their users behave in different ways. They have different communities and things like that. So you gotta, and that's the reason that one of the discussions is really one of the initial discussions is really about what is your strategy.
Mhm.
You gotta know more about what the customer, what the enterprise is trying to achieve with that particular project.
Right. With something like AI, fundamentally the technology is about personalization. And so it's not something where we can say, all right, this is where the industry is moving. You can have general directions and trends, but you can't say
Yeah,
this is where the industry is going because you can't just generalize like that. I think maybe a
exactly.
good example is the world of CPUs. Generally, there's been this sort of monopoly of like, Intel, also a little bit of AMD, in the CPU market. And one of the reasons that for example, say Apple Silicon, one of the reasons it's generally working so well is not just because of the fact that Apple Silicon is great, but just the fact that Intel has a fundamental limitation where they're trying to design CPUs for everybody, right? Just because Apple
Right.
wants something doesn't mean that they're going to design a special CPU just for Apple, right? Apple's going to have to be using stock components that everybody else also gets to have access to, and so because of
Exactly.
that,
Exactly.
yeah, because they can't really personalize and tailor, that's where the limitation really comes in, and that's now how we're starting to see more, use case specific silicon, because Moore's law isn't going to take us all the way, right? We need specialized computing architectures for different tasks. We're seeing
And
Intel, Qualcomm, all these companies doing like machine learning accelerators, for example.
yeah, yeah, and that's exactly what happens in the enterprise, world, because um, you have different use cases that are extremely personalized based on their strategy and their challenges. The challenge might be, sometimes similar from customer to customer because they might be within the same industry, but the strategy might be different. I have not seen. There was a time when in the same week I talked to two manufacturer companies, car manufacturer. They were actually direct competitors, and the strategy from one to another, they were extremely different.
Wow.
The pain points that one another was actually going through. And I was like, on my second meeting, I was like, I know everything about cars and how you manufacture, right? I was going to that meeting very easy. I was like, I know everything. And I was like, no, Thiago, where's the growth mindset? You might not know everything. So, and when I stepped into that meeting, start having the conversations, I was like, is that really a car manufacturing conversation? Because the strategy is different, the pain points are different, really the challenges are different. And that's the reason that I'm telling you that that really depends on what the companies are trying to achieve. And
Mm-hmm.
they are trying to achieve different objectives, different
Yeah.
objectives.
Really depends on what you're trying to optimize for, what your specific challenges are in trying to optimize for that goal. There's so many things to keep in mind.
Yeah.
And, actually, speaking of enterprises and, applying machine learning technology, something else that I'm really wondering is, we've talked a lot about the evolution of how enterprises have sort of been applying artificial intelligence. But something that I'm really also passionate about is the nomenclature for this sort of technology, because
Mhm.
I feel like a lot of the way that we think is reflected in the way that we speak and the way that we communicate, right? The fact that we call AI artificial intelligence tells us a lot about how we subconsciously perceive it, versus what it actually is, really. And in specific, I know that a long time ago, and when I was a kid getting into like AI services, there was this huge sort of focus on cognitive computing and cognitive services, whereas now we
Right.
usually hear more of like machine learning, and deep learning and the actual like technology, these technologies and more like scientific names. So, could you maybe expand a little bit more into why exactly we've seen
Right.
that evolution, and is it just the same thing with a different name? What has the
Mhm.
evolution been behind the scenes that has warranted this name change?
Yeah, yeah, that's a well-pointed question. Because I've been in conversations where in the past, I was just giving a presentation to the customer and I was talking about cognitive services. And at the end of the presentation, I actually opened it up for question. And the first question was, we thought that we discussed artificial intelligence. I was like, oh gosh. So, well pointed out on that question. So the fact that we are the fact that we are seeing machine learning almost in every discussion and not much now cognitive services, like you said, that we used to have more discussions around that, does not mean that cognitive services, do not exist anymore,
Mm-hmm.
right? You know that. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you know where I'm going to. So I think the first thing that we need to make sure is that everyone understand that cognitive services are services that provide machine learning capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
However, cognitive services were created to with a specific reason to accelerate the resolution of general problems such as, you name it, analyzing text and extracting entities, right? Analyzing sentiment, analyzing images to recognize, we talk here about faces, about objects, right? Or even more common now, capabilities like, we talk about chatbots, but we didn't talk about the implementation around speech to text and text to speech, which is extremely common now with chatbots,
Mm-hmm.
where you explore the voice transcription and the conversion of text into voice.
Yeah.
So cognitive services continue to exist, and it is a group of services that support what we call as a generalized prediction capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
It's about generalization, right? And when I say generalize, it is because cognitive services are fundamentally pre-trained machine learning with generic data. And a benefit of using cognitive services that, that ability that you talked in early, where you can, just deploy the project quickly, right? You were so used to showing how these things were done. And the intent that you had before in the early years was that, let me show it how you can do that very quickly,
Yeah.
right? And then let me show you how you can have a face recognition or object recognition very quickly without even training the model, right?
Yes.
Because many of the services are really pre-trained and can be quickly deployed. So the other thing is the ability to use these services, and that's very important because when the customers say to me, "Wow, I don't have that strong capability inside of my organization of data science," right?
Mm-hmm.
So cognitive services really bring the benefit of, if you don't have it, data science knowledge, you can use cognitive services anyway, because you don't need to be like pipeline for training the data, right? Run multiple experiments to check with, which algorithm is the best for a particular case. I know that you've been through this
Yeah.
before. So you use the service out of the box as is, and
Absolutely.
with the services that allow you to train the model even using data sets that you have through a graphic interface, which is great, because people might think, wow, cognitive service is something that I cannot change. Not necessarily, and
Mm-hmm.
we know that. You actually can use some of the data sets that you have and train the model on the top of the generic ground truth that
Yeah.
was used to train the cognitive services. Now, to the question that you asked, have the enterprise market shift from cognitive services to machine learning? Yes. And the reason is that enterprises are facing very industry specific challenges that pre-trained generic machine learning model as those found in cognitive services cannot solve. And that's where machine learning comes in, allowing companies to bring their data and best optimize algorithms to solve, specific needs. So when I say that to my customers, when I have a discussion around that, I just, I always bring an example around healthcare.
Yes.
And basically, you don't want, a doctor being relied on generic data models to support a diagnosis, right? So you don't want that. So nobody wants that. So with enterprise domains coming into a more narrow niche discussion of their business, machine learning is now more commonly discussed, right? So sometimes what frustrates companies that had previous experiences with cognitive services, and that ability to quickly put into production a use case that works fine. You can do that in hours maybe. When it comes of on developing a machine learning model from scratch, you know more than I. It demands more time
Mm-hmm.
because you need to spend time like collecting the data, cleaning the data, normalizing the data,
Right.
transforming the data, selecting the appropriate algorithm, right? Training the model, refining the model. Man, it takes time. And then deploying that into production to get the same level of functionalities that are provided today by the cognitive services. So this comes to an important discussion with companies in terms of timeline when they want to actually extend the discussion around machine learning models and the differences between cognitive services. Does it make sense to you? How you see that?
Yeah, absolutely. They're fundamentally different things, and I feel like there's a role for all of these different services and tools, right? Like for example, if you're a developer and you're building an application and you're just dealing with generic internet data and you want to be able to determine the sentiment of a social media post, for example, there's no reason to go ahead and say I'm going to build my own neural network from scratch. I'm going to take this transformer
Not
and
at
all this
all.
data, right? You don't need to do that because you can just go to like IBM or Google or Microsoft, and they have lots of cognitive services that already do this very well, probably better than you could do it yourself actually, because they've been
Oh,
fine-tuned very well. But
yeah,
then, and then even, as you mentioned, if you want to do some fine tuning, if you want to create your own text to speech bot with a custom voice, you can still use a cognitive service for that. But then, right as you start getting into the more like, I am an Apple Music or a Spotify, and I have my own very custom techniques for understanding and classifying music by genre and doing recommendation. That's where you want to start getting into the let's build a machine learning pipeline from scratch, right? Because that is very, very
yeah,
business critical. That is a competitive advantage. That's something where every last prediction can help you out there, right? So
exactly,
it really
exactly.
depends on what you want to do, what your skill set is, where you're applying it. And again, healthcare is the perfect example, right? Do you really want someone making a diagnosis based off of a generic model? Probably not.
Yeah, and Tomei, on my discussions with enterprises is that sometimes they really want to stick because their challenges are really big and cognitive services cannot solve because of their narrow industry specific use cases. Um, Sometimes they don't have a team inside of SMEs that can actually put the hands on the models, right? They don't have a data scientist with that particular industry specific knowledge to develop the model. So that's another thing that adds more time on building a machine learning model as well, right? They 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 very often compare, why cognitive services can be developed, can be deployed so quickly, and machine learning cannot if you actually have so many other tooling today available, right, to deploy the pipelines. You don't do that anymore like manually. You have plenty of tools that support you doing that. And then that's where I have that discussion. Well, if you don't have an industry expertise data scientist team to actually go and understand your data, I don't think that the tech knowledge cloud provider companies might have that specific knowledge on that niche of problems that you guys have to really produce a very accurate model for you in months, right? Like a couple of months. That's not going to happen. So it takes time really to even have the right resources inside to look at the models and produce something that's going to solve the problem. So,
Right. You need domain expertise when you're building machine learning. You can't just say,
correct.
healthcare, I'm going to put a data scientist team on the job and that's it. They need to be working
No,
with the oncologists, with the people actually experts in healthcare to understand even just the data, right? There's so much use case specific optimization that needs to happen in machine learning. It's really incredible. And even at a lot of times, it's hard for even domain experts to really fully help out the data science teams and actually help them figure out, this is the kind of optimization that we need to do because there's that gap, right? And actually, speaking of the gap, and speaking of machine learning pipelines and speeding things up,
uh-huh.
I know that one of the most popular new things on the block is AutoML. And automated artificial
Sure.
intelligence pipeline building, and it's one of those things where it works, but you wonder where it's being positioned. Because a lot of people will advertise it, and I feel like the media, and especially people that aren't very familiar with technology, will be like, oh, we're replacing data scientists now, and obviously that's not the case. But I want to know from you, where is AutoML being positioned from your perspective, and then I can also comment on like from a more technical perspective as well, where I think it's being applied. But where have you seen different companies using AutoML, and is it something that's popular at all in the first place?
Well, that brings me to a lot of reflection on discussions that I had before. I'm going to be very frank with you that I have just I think that I had like a couple of discussions with customers that are really interested on knowing more about AutoML. So when I look at AutoML, excuse me, I see it as a I see as a result of years of research, right? Let's be frank. We need to give credits that AutoML is just outstanding,
Yeah.
right? How how it is really a breakthrough research outcome that is focused on how you push machine learning adoption forward with speed and with a high propensity of doing that at scale. So that's the fundamentally part of why do we need to have AutoML, because that can really accelerate the adoption of machine learning and at scale, right? It's really about how you can produce different machine learning models very quickly. It's really quick. So for those companies with industry specific use cases in which machine learning could be applied, but it does not have a team of data scientists, to your point, is it going to replace data scientists? Absolutely not. No, those data scientists that are with us in here, hear me out. This is not going to replace you, man. You have so many skills and the knowledge on how really better develop the machine learning models that today the AutoML it's not capable of doing. But getting here back to the discussion is that um, you for those companies with very industry specific use cases in for where they want to use machine learning, that where they see that machine learning could be applied, but they don't have a team of data scientists to extensively look at the different performance of algorithms being used to solve the problem. I do believe that AutoML can be a way to go, but at the same time, it's not positioned as something that will solve the time consuming problems and cost for producing the machine learning models for every single scenario. And that's where I want to develop a little bit more on our conversation. And as I get my thoughts really structuring here, let's get the definition of AutoML, and maybe you can help me out in here on our perspective. So AutoML, or what we call as automated machine learning, is the process of automating the end-to-end time-consuming process for developing a machine learning model, right? Is that the way and how you understand as well,
I
Tanmay?
would say so. Yeah. Yeah. Generally.
Yeah. So great. So you've been working in projects that require you to develop a machine learning model, and traditionally the process requires you time to what? Analyze the data. We talked before, like clean the data, split the data for training and test,
Yeah.
research to select the appropriate algorithm, configure the pipelines, analyze results, and all the process over again when you need to compare, right, results. So you do this for one algorithm, and then you see the results and you see and think like, is it really good model? Is it really delivering the accuracy that I expect? So let me test that again with another algorithm,
Yeah.
right? And then you do everything again. So it's time consuming, right? So
Absolutely.
these things are really, really, exhausting. And for enterprises with teams of multiple professionals, it costs a lot of money when training and training models that need to be selected as the best model for solving a particular problem. So to that point, then enterprise or teams of data scientists, software engineers, data engineers across industries can use AutoML to uh, implement machine learning solutions without the extensive program knowledge, right? It can help them save time and resources. It can help you leverage best practices, most likely,
Yeah.
and for sure, last but not least, provide that agile way of problem solving. For those that never had the chance to use AutoML, the last time that I was able to get the hands on Azure Machine Learning Studio to experience that particular feature, it was extremely interesting to see how much it allows you to save on analyzing algorithm performance. Because in a nutshell, you you design an experiment to capture the data. and you drag and drop, the different functions that it's going to perform, like clean the data, normalize the data, and then if your problem is like classification, clustering, and I think the other one was like forecast, the AutoML will be able to create multiple pipelines for you across the different algorithms. And when you want to try and each iteration, it produces a model with a score. And out of that score, you see which algorithm got the best score to solve your problem. So again, I do believe, to your question, I do believe that AutoML will continue to be positioned as the best way to automate the time consuming of machine learning development, considering some of the most common algorithms like classification, clustering, and what's the last one that I said? Forecasting.
Yes.
Right. So, but if it is anything outside of those type of machine learning algorithms, that's not the case for AutoML.
Yeah.
And I want to see, you are just giving me the smile. So I want to see your perspective as well on that.
For sure, for sure. No, I'd love to share. I mean, first of all, I think you have a really, really good summary of the world of AutoML, right? It's quite literally the part that takes the grunt work and does it for us, right? The part that is just like test with different architectures and figure out which one's good with the different feature extraction, normalization, standardization methods, and then take that output and interpret it, and then all that simple search is now conducted by the machine. But maybe a good analogy would be there's this service called Tab9, and essentially what they do is they use neural networks to have better coding autocomplete. So if you use like a coding environment like an IDE, then you may know that you have code autocomplete, where it'll predict what token you want to type next, and you can hit tab and it'll autofill. And those are very useful. They really speed up coding. It's one of the reasons that developers use IDEs over like just Vim in a terminal. However, the thing about Tab9 is that they actually use neural networks to predict multiple tokens ahead. So they'll actually use a bunch of open source code on GitHub as well as your own code, try and understand what you're writing and be like, oh, you're implementing this logic, so maybe this is the entire line that you want to write, and then you can hit tab and it fills out the entire line. And it's usually very, very accurate. But saying that AutoML will replace data scientists is like saying Tab9 will replace coders. That's wow. Not how it works.
Yeah, and wonderful analogy. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I gotta say, AutoML is actually, I think AutoML serves two roles, if I'm going to be honest, not just one. One of the roles is bridging the gap. Even if it's a really small gap, there's a tiny gap between like cognitive services and machine learning, where if you're, say, going back to the example of you're a developer and you're implementing an app and you want sentiment classification, it's possible that your data has a general enough task like sentiment prediction, but at the same time is specialized enough that generic cognitive services won't work, right? Like, for example, I know my mentor, Timothy Duncan, has been working on like news article title sentiment prediction. And he hasn't necessarily implemented deep neural networks and stuff before, so he can't do machine learning from scratch. But at the same time, his task is too complex for just a generic cognitive service. And so AutoML kind of bridges that gap and says, okay, you know what? You can go on Google Cloud, you can feed in your data and train a natural language classifier without needing to do anything, right? From a machine learning perspective. But then at the same time, while there's that tiny gap that gets bridged, it also becomes a tool in the data scientist's tool belt to then be like, oh, I know I need to apply a recurrent neural network here, but I don't know which recurrent neural network cell is going to work best. I don't know what learning rate or learning rate scheduler or batch size or normalization is going to work best. So let's let AutoML figure it out for me, right? It's about that. But at the end of the day, I always say that data science and machine learning is more of an art than a science, right? It requires creativity. And that's something that AutoML can't replace. It's just like, there was this one really famous tweet, I keep, forgetting who tweeted this, but someone had said that if we were to use GPT-3 to just keep generating the internet would never evolve, it would never change, it would just be what it is continuously, perpetually, right? And so if we were to just keep using AutoML to do everything for us, we would never be able to do anything new with machine learning ever, right? Like we wouldn't go from recurrent networks to the transformer, we would just be at slightly better recurrent networks. So
Yeah.
it's all about that
Think,
creativity.
yeah, the other thing that you just, pop in my mind was that, think about the popularity of, algorithms like unsupervised and reinforcement learning. Those are not available in AutoML. So, and they are becoming more and more popular. And as we see, that particular technology really evolving and being used and applied in a lot of use cases, like autonomous driving and things like that, um, man, that's exactly. I just like it. I love the example that you said that the creativity is something that AutoML is not going to replace, and that's what comes from data scientists when they look at the data and they have the transition where they're just looking the data like they were just in love with that data, and they just have an idea of, wow, I know how to solve that problem. So this is not going to happen with AutoML. So and that's a big thing about AutoML not replacing people for sure. Just
Definitely.
like in the past that AI would just replace people in their jobs, right? And not do anything in the benefits for us. So I think that AutoML is actually creating some new opportunities for
Yes.
sure, right? It is expediting the way and how we produce machine learning models across different organizations, and giving the chance even for those organizations that don't have a robust team of data scientists to use machine learning to solve some of their problems. So it is too important. It is, I see AutoML as a function that is really very inclusive, to
Yeah.
say. May. I feel like, wow, when I first thought about AutoML, the first thing that came to my mind was, wow, we've been so inclusive on the purpose of developing this. And I was like, wow, that's the reason that we want to empower people and companies to do more. So, as a Microsoft, when I saw the research papers and I read a little bit about AutoML before, I was like, wow, that's really inclusiveness. So that's kind of nice.
Absolutely. It's about lowering that barrier of entry. Now, just because the barrier of entry is lowered doesn't mean there's less opportunities for people past the barrier of entry. It just means it's lower and more people can get into it, right? It's making
Yeah.
it's democratizing AI further. And speaking of democratizing AI, there's two questions that I want to take up from the audience now. Starting off from a
Okay.
question from LinkedIn from Raj Tuliani asking, what more can the big tech companies do to support the open source community in terms of AI? So, what do you think, supporting the open source community for AI?
So we have a lot of initiatives, especially in the Microsoft and an open source, where we collaborate with the community. We expose codes via GitHub, and we make that available so the community can actually collaborate. Microsoft. I'm going to be a little biased on that because Microsoft now on GitHub, right? And we've been developing a lot of things and putting that in the GitHub available so people can actually reuse. I was always a big fan of what I call it in the past as a marketplace. If we had a marketplace, it can be GitHub. If we had a marketplace where people can actually develop something that they believe it works better, for a specific use case and works, good to solve some of these problems, and they can make that available so people can reuse and improve. I think that we will be living in a better world today in the tech way, right? So I see that the companies should be really willing to see that the problems that we are today facing, it's something that is extremely common to everybody. And making sure that we have a place where the community can actually look at in a good way and reuse the stuff to expedite how we solve problems is the future. So I see more and more companies getting into partnerships between, even, competitors are actually making partnerships to make sure that we can provide more to the community, and
Yes.
that's going to continue to happen. So my opinion, and that's again Thiago's opinion, is that I see more and more companies really willing to develop good um, algorithms that's going to change the way and how we approach the problems and make that available to the community, because we understand that we don't know at all. We actually need to learn from other people that are out there outside of our company, and make sure that we capture those good process and ways of solving problems and bring that back to the algorithm or to the solutions, and making that available is the way to go and how we're going to solve problems in the future. So
Absolutely.
I'm a little bit biased on that because, again, I'm a big fan of how we can develop something and then make that available and let people really reuse that for the good of our planet. So
I mean, honestly, you're rightfully biased. I like that kind of bias, and and it's because simply we've found that working together is generally a better solution, right? Even companies that, as you mentioned, are traditionally competitors are now collaborating with each other. IBM is going the extra mile to support TensorFlow on Power and Z. We see Microsoft, Google, and Amazon and IBM and all these other companies, and literally just hundreds of thousands of just regular developers across the globe contributing to projects like the Linux kernel, Kubernetes, Docker, and so much more. And I feel like really it just boils down to, as a company, doing good for the community is good for business. It's not even just a community thing. First of all, it is a community thing, of course. But then also, if you think about it from a company perspective and you try and find a business justification for it, you can even very easily find one, because when you collaborate with the community, when you work with them, you are bringing people in to use your tools, to use your platform, right? And that sort of leads to more people wanting, or more enterprises really being filled with people that want to use your tools, right? And so that's something that, I mean, it goes back to WinRAR's, the joke of you go to heaven if you buy a WinRAR license, and and the reason that they let you pirate WinRAR is because they know that as an individual you're going to find a way to pirate it anyway, and we're not going to go after every individual who pirates the software, so just give it to
right,
everybody
yeah,
for free. But then any company is going to have to pay because they don't want to risk the legal issues, and if people are just used to using WinRAR, that's what they're going to start paying for, right? So that's
exactly.
sort of similar to that model, except much better for the community, because it's not just unzipping files, it's quite
Yeah.
literally artificial intelligence and Docker and containerization and all these different things that are really, really critical today. So
And
that's
again, yeah, and again, truth to be told, that when you have, good stuff being shared, it is your decision of taking that and reusing the way and how it is. But usually what happens is that nobody's gonna just take it and reuse without looking at the way and how it is done, right? The way and how the process is being done. So usually what happens, even internally here, when we found something on a GitHub, is that we're gonna grab it, we're gonna see how it works, and do our testing here before really deploying that in production. But if you start seeing the more benefits of accelerating the way on how you solve the problems, and things that you take like months to really think on how to solve, and then you just found that code on GitHub and you can reuse and put it in production in just days, man, that saves a lot of time. And not just the time, but you start seeing the real benefits of sharing. And like my kid says, sharing is caring. So there we go.
absolutely, sharing really is caring, and I feel like that applies everywhere, even in the technology world. Right. So now
Yeah.
for just a moment back to the world of chatbots before we continue, I do see a
Hmm.
question also from the YouTube live stream from Cecily asking, is using chatbots for customer service really better than using one of the many other vectors that most big companies offer you, like apps, websites, or just messaging on Twitter or phone support? So I feel like we have covered this a little bit before. It really depends on the implementation and if you get it right. But what are
Yeah.
your thoughts?
No, I think you were right. So the typical technology that is available today for everybody actually use that, it is more kind of decision tree kind of
Yeah.
technology in which you need to actually map very stricted to that dialogue. If something goes out of that dialogue and there is no intent identification around, the phrase in which a chatbot would be able to identify, then you actually gonna generate a poor experience, right? It is, again, back to the implementation. So it is, I feel that really depends on what your objective is. If you just want to give a way of people can give, can have a better way of automating some of the tasks, and you have a solution in which you can automate that via options, giving the options and showing not giving any other option to the users to select, for example, is going to be a way to go. But if you want a better experience where you give the end user a natural way of communicating, then chatbots implementations, it's the way to go. So yeah, I think that we cover a little bit on that already.
Absolutely. That makes complete sense. Wonderful. I do now also want to ask you one more thing. I mean, something that's been an interesting topic of discussion across a bunch of Tech Life Skills episodes has always been
Mm-hmm.
digital transformation. And in particular, my most memorable episode where we talked about digital transformation was the one with Mike Tibbs, former VP at a Fortune 1 company. And
Mm-hmm.
he talked about the fact that he really doesn't like the word digital transformation. Because sure, you can do digital transformation, but you didn't necessarily transform for the better, right? That digital transformation in no way, in its own definition, implies that you transform for the better. It just means you're more digital now, you use more technology. But is it really a better process, right? Like if you had a lot of paperwork before to get something done and you just transitioned that to e-contracts, does that really make it better? Or, yeah, I mean, okay, maybe marginally, but do you want to maybe evolve your entire process to really utilize technology to make the process better, right? So
Yeah.
he feels like the term is a little bit shallow, and I know that one of the key pillars to like digital transformation and something that like lots of big companies across really different industries have been sort of considering is that artificial intelligence and machine learning again are big pillars of digital transformation. And I wanted to ask you, is that still the case? Do we continue to have that sort of, strong adoption of, as companies go on their digital transformation journeys, AI machine learning is something that they really keep in mind? Or is that something that sort of started off, but now it's more of a niche thing? Are we seeing that continue to grow, or is it plateauing? What's the trend like?
So yeah, that's a very interesting question, and there are a few things that are happening in the market today, which is leading to a different path, right, than what we've seen in the past couple of years. So around digital transformation, about 2 years ago, we were hearing a lot of companies being digitally transformed, right? And to your point, it is just about adopting one particular tool or solution that's going to digitally transform my business, and that's not right. So what is happening today is that after a couple of years in which people has been experimenting like AI and machine learning, they just found out that to continue the journey of digitally transforming their business using technology, they actually need to give a step back and work towards the data state modernization, because the digital transformation is at some extent, at some level, highly dependent upon on a good data state, a good core foundational components that's going to support the digital transformation in the stack.
Yes.
So, and that's exactly what is happening. I'm trying to summarize the different trends in the market, but what is happening is that the company is just realizing that to give a step forward on their machine learning project, they actually need to work around how they have their data together. Because when we start, asking them about, okay, we need more data because machine learning AI projects are highly dependent on data, and it's not just data; it is data with quality, right?
Yes.
We are talking about a quality of data that you have to really be used to produce the outcomes that you expect. Otherwise, that code that talks about, what is that? It's the junks in, junks out, or there are other expressions about it where if you don't have a good data, you're probably going to have a bad outcome. So, and when we start having these discussions with the enterprise, they just realize, wow, we have like 15 organizations, and each of them they have somehow similar information. Which one we should use? I've seen a lot of people actually ask me, Thiago, which one we should use, and it was like, I don't know. I really don't know. And that's exactly what we need to get back and start working more in the data state modernization and start modernizing and bringing some of the strategy around data, in which you're gonna have data lakes, where you're gonna have data warehouse to really get the raw data and putting that into data warehouse that's going to serve the other layer on the top. And throughout that process, you're going to work on really cleaning the data, normalizing the data, and make sure that we have a good quality of information that's going to be used to digitally transform, which means to move forward with the digital transformation that you need. So, and again, there is no digital transformation without modernization, as well as there is no modernization if you don't have a digital transformation project. You might have the more, the modern data state, but if you don't have the creativity to come up with solutions that will digitally transform your business, you're not moving forward. So you're not creating that competitive around your business to compete in the market. So this is a little bit what is happening between, the fact that digital transformation is not being discussed. It is being discussed, right? But now they are just realizing that they need to give a step back to work towards the core foundation components before they move forward.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like the best analogy here would be, before you build a house, obviously you need to have a good foundation, the infrastructure. But at the
Exactly.
same time, even if you have the greatest infrastructure, an entire plot of land with the greatest infrastructure, you could either build what's known as McMansion hell, or you could actually build good houses. So, you need
Exactly.
to know what to build on
Exactly.
top of it too.
Yeah, you just remind me to there is a particular slide that I've done that I've created, which is exactly that. It shows a house. It's a beautiful house. And then in the other slide, I show the foundation of the house. And I ask the customer, the people that are actually seeing my presentation, why do you think it is wrong? And people realize, well, the house is beautiful, but when I say keep your eyes on details that you need to keep that house up, right? And they look at the foundation, they look at the bottom of the slide and see, wow, that foundation is it's not good. It's not good. So yes, so exactly. So that analogy is perfect when you think about how you want to move forward. Because as a house, you have a beautiful house, but you're gonna do a lot of stuff on that house. And if your foundation is not ready, is not good, what's gonna happen? It's gonna fall down, right? So it is exactly the same thing with the projects that as you move forward around digital transformation, develop more projects that are dependent on data, and you start having, data that is not in a good quality, you're probably going to generate, poor outcome. And that poor outcome is going to translate to less efficiency. It's going to translate about, customer insatisfaction, dissatisfaction, and you're gonna actually not being able to compete anymore. You're actually gonna lose timing, and that's the time to market, right? You're gonna lose timing because your competitors will be working towards that. So, yeah, it's a great analogy. I like it.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I feel like the part of really everything in the world is the part actually of everything that's the least attractive, but yet I think the most important is infrastructure. If you don't have the right infrastructure for something, you're never going to have what you need. There's the famous joke of, there's some really popular YouTubers on the platform, like, for example, there's like Wendover Productions, right? And there's the famous joke of
Mm-hmm.
he can't stop making videos about planes and shipping and logistics. And there's lots of other YouTubers like him that do similar things and just focus on oddly specific things and make really great videos about them. But something that's so fascinating about covering all of that is behind the scenes, behind everything that we just do as humans, there's all of this work that needs to happen to enable that to exist, right? And that's
Yep.
exactly why, like when I code, I generally am more interested in, how exactly is the compiler working with this code, and what sort of interactions are happening at the lower level. And similarly with artificial intelligence, it's not just, hey, let's just build another machine learning algorithm. It is, how does this tie into the application with the user perspective? How are we gathering the data? How is that going into that loop of continuously training and making the model more relevant? There's so much that
Right.
goes on than just machine learning, right? That's where the data science really comes in, and then the data engineering and sort of tying that in with the actual application piece. So
Yeah,
there's so much.
and there is some point in the discussion in which you're gonna ask yourself, do I have data to do that?
Yes.
Right? You start working on a very modern, sophisticated machine learning model, and you have it, and then where's the data? And you don't have the data. and that's gonna get people really frustrated about it, right? And I talk about modernization, and you talk a little bit about it as well, tell me that sometimes modernization to enterprise is more about how I migrate on-prem to cloud,
Mm-hmm.
right? To get the benefits of cloud. How do I migrate, my legacy systems into cloud? You may have different strategies on how you do that because people usually, the companies usually get stuck on that strategy on between modernization and digital transformation. And that's the reason that some of the digital transformation projects are being delayed because they don't know, they don't have a strategy on what they need to do. Is because I do have a bunch of legacy systems in here, hundreds of applications in here that are dependent on the databases. How do I migrate that to the cloud?
Mm-hmm.
If you stop and think about it, it is really complex. Think about a company with hundreds of applications that depend on that particular database. And when
Mm-hmm.
you move to the cloud to use the, PaaS instead of the infrastructure as a service, like moving a virtual machine, right? So that might change the way and how the application is going to grab the information. So are you able to also modernize the application? So the reason that I'm bringing that up is because it is really important when we think about modernization, think about the dependencies that you have. Do you have dependencies on the application? Because most likely, if you migrate to and modernize to PaaS, everything that you have on-prem, you're probably gonna break the mission critical applications.
Mm-hmm.
So you gotta think how you're gonna actually modernize the entire, ecosystem and make sure that you can move these modernization projects forward. And one of the ways of thinking about it is really, do I have access to the code of these applications so I can change the way and how the database is being done, right? Change the database to a new target database.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have, access to that code, you probably need to adopt another strategy around maybe I'm going to migrate to virtual machine and then I can think, later on how I'm going to convert that to PaaS.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking about the strategy on how you modernize, it is really important. It is really critical to how you develop the digital transformation strategy later on.
Absolutely. It's there's so much that goes behind things that really a lot of people don't see on the surface. Something that starts off as a simple statement can turn into years of work. I remember, and I can't give exact details because it's an internal thing. But there was this one project at IBM. It's a really really large project. It's like tens of millions of lines of code, and they used this really old like internal version control system, and they didn't
Right.
use Git, but now they wanted to transform to use Git and their internal enterprise GitHub, and there's thousands of people working on this in tens of countries. This project, and just because of the sheer scale of it, the transition from that version control software to Git took like 3 entire years to complete. And
Wow.
you think it would be easy because there's technically a tool. There's literally a tool you can run that runs this VC system to Git conversion, and it can actually help you transform the whole history and everything into Git. But something that seems simple and would be like, oh yeah, just run the command, deploy to Git, and you're good to go. But wait, no, there's hundreds of processes. There's the regression systems. There's the testing. There's the developers who know how to use this. There's the developers who have virtual systems that are linked to be using specifically this version of the. There's just so much stuff to take into account that you don't realize when you just say, oh yeah, let's just migrate to Git, right? So
Right.
there's so much more that goes behind all these things to
Yeah,
keep in
we
mind.
might think that we might think that there is no dependency, dependencies across, modernization, digital transformation, machine learning, but yeah, we have a lot of dependencies that need to be taught.
Yeah.
So um, anyway,
Yep, it's definitely interesting to look into. But again, that's the infrastructure of AI is all of working with data and working with compute. Right. So now there is another question from YouTube. It's from an audience member named C to C, asking how is AI changing buying and selling in 2021 by leveraging machine learning and AI. So I think this is a bit more open ended in terms of like buying and selling. But any thoughts on how machine learning is evolving that?
so yeah, if you think about, the recommendation algorithms and personalization that we talk already in here, these are some of the pillars that are actually motivating more how you buy and you sell. You buy because of being motivated about buying this because that's going to solve your problem, but you buying because the system probably understand your desires, right? So, and even the sell side where you start having systems that are capable of capturing information and different triggers that motivate the buyers to buy my product. So you certainly have. I've been having discussions with retailers on even on how they compete with other big players in the market, and it is all about the selling and buying process on how you can apply machine learning algorithms to actually understand better the buyers and offer, not just for the sake of offering something. It's not a recommendation like just because you saw this product, let me see, maybe you might be interested to that product. That's not necessarily right? Because people think differently. I may need to know more about how you navigate on my website. You might be looking at a particular book, but not necessarily look at other books that other people that look at book that you look at before were looking as well. And then I should recommend that to you. Not necessarily. We need to start understanding the behavior, right, of the user and how he or she is looking for information to then recommend something that is more assertive. So again, to the question, is it going to change the way and how we buy and sell in the next upcoming years? For sure. And that's already happening. We might not know exactly how these things are happening as
Yeah.
users, right? As end users, but the companies are investing a lot to give you more personalized recommendations other than just because you saw this, you might be interested to that.
Right.
And even internally with the companies, they actually want to understand you better, not only to recommend you, but to give you a better customer support on whatever you might need. Maybe I need to know more about my users to know exactly what are the other things that I should have in my uh, supply, right? What are the other products that I should actually be supplying you because you are just searching for that, and people are not buying the things that I have. So how can I have other products then that's gonna actually supply the desire of our end users and make sure that we establish that long-term relationship with them. So yeah, that's gonna change.
Right. I mean, AI has been changing buying and selling for many, many years now. And I feel, again,
Oof. Yeah.
recommendations is like the top use case for this. And I feel like what's really nice is that now we can move from just collaborative filtering to really understanding
Uh-huh.
causality, at least to a certain extent. Causality is this whole mess of a field, but we can begin to scratch at the surface of causality with AI to be like, you might have bought this book on Amazon, but maybe you bought it for a completely different reason than pretty much everybody else, and that's why we should recommend B to you and not A.
Yeah.
Or like, for example, if you go to Apple Music and you listen to a certain piece of music, just because you liked this one specific song from this artist in this genre doesn't mean you only like this artist in this genre from here on out. Older music recommendation systems would have been like, here's more from the same artist, and here's more from
Yep.
other artists like him. But now it can get much more fine grained to be like, oh, maybe from this specific album, this specific song, because of this piece, it sounds similar to this, and it can start to get much more complex. So
That's exactly what is happening. It's being more what the customer says, the enterprise says granular. It's a
yes.
granular knowledge, granular knowledge. It's not more generic how, just, that few behave just because the user's behaving in that way, we should offer that. No, it's more, do I have granular knowledge on what is really happening with that particular person? And that's the way on how they are moving forward on implementing a use case, not only for selling, but also for buying.
Right. And so now, finally, this one, again, I think a more open ended question, but a question from the YouTube
Mhm.
live stream from Kalyan asking, what is the best deployment tool for AI models? So I feel like it really does depend on the use case and where
Yeah.
you want to deploy and what you're wanting to deploy. But any sort of tips and tricks, maybe you could list out a couple that are helpful for deploying AI models.
So yeah, I don't have a firm opinion on that to say this is the best one. I'm gonna
Mhm.
be really biased to say, well, look, use the Microsoft tooling that you have available in Azure, but I don't want to. So I'd say that there are a lot of like you said, that is really highly dependent upon what you want to do, how you want to do, and how easy you think that tool, a particular tool is for your work. I found a lot of people that are so used to use other Microsoft competitors tooling to deploy algorithms inside of Azure. And I was even asking why you do that. Why don't you use like the Azure machine learning studios and Azure machine learning tools that we have to deploy the model? Because he was actually so used to do that, and he is very productive on doing that, right?
Mhm.
So he said, I feel like for now I'm doing that because I can deploy that very quickly. I understand how it works, and I'm going to use the platform to process the model. So I can use Azure to process the model, but the tooling is a different one. So at some point in time, I see that the enterprise might change because they want to concentrate a particular workload using the tooling from the same provider. But with the multi-cloud strategy that
Yeah.
companies are actually adopting, they're actually experiment everything. And
Mhm.
again, I'm a big fan when the enterprise come to me and the customer says, "I'm using this that is not Microsoft." I say, "Okay, how you get along with this?" "Oh, I'm doing great, and I can use your platform to compute." "That's great. How productive are you being?" And he says, "I'm being very productive. I do the stuff that I can do, and we're gonna be doing the business in this way." And I
Mhm.
say, "That's great. Is that really aligned with your strategy?" "Yes, we are using functions from that provider, and Microsoft, and we feel great about it. That's great." And I say it's good to have a partnership with you and see that you are experimenting some of the technologies that we have. So I just feel like it is the way and how it works, right?
Mhm.
So again, I'm going to be biased to say use just Microsoft Azure Machine Learning Studio to do that, but there are plenty of other toolings that you can use.
Right. So you don't have necessarily like a firm opinion on exactly what tool to use, but then again, it really does depend on what you want to use, what you want to deploy, why you're going to deploy it, where you're going to be calling it from, so many different things. And again, I feel like
Yeah.
today we're sort of shifting to both a hybrid and multi-cloud strategy where it's not like, you know what, I'm signed up to Microsoft, I'm using all of Microsoft services. No, it's really a combination of a lot
Yeah.
of things. You could be using, all of Google's products like TensorFlow and whatever their open and closed source things they have on Azure. You could be using IBM Private Cloud on AWS, right? There's so much that you can do today just because of how flexible the sort of industry has become.
And
And
and the
so,
beautiful and the beautiful thing about that, Talmud, is that it gives motivation to cloud providers to continue evolving their tooling,
yes.
right? So because they know that the customers, the enterprise, will be experimenting different tooling across the other competitors. So that pushed them forward to provide other toolings and develop new services and put that available in the platform. It's kind of nice to see, how these things are evolving in the cloud computing world.
Exactly. Like we all know that competition is always good for the for the consumer. In this case, the consumer is the enterprise. And
Yep.
actually, it's great that you brought this up because just a little while ago, we were talking with Stephen Astorino as well as Animesh Singh, and that was actually one of the key things we were talking about is thanks to the multi-cloud strategy, cloud providers are being forced to really differentiate their services
Yep.
and really get them to be as good as they can be and as personalized as well. And so that's just goes to show the advantages of having more competition really pushes us to be better. Right now, there is
Yeah,
one
love it.
yeah, there's one more thing that I want to ask you before we start closing today's session, and that is that I know that as we had talked and we had talked before the episode as well. One of the things that you're really passionate about is leadership, and I can tell from like what you've shared with us today, and that mindset that you have of just always finding that next thing that you want to work on or learn or get into, right? And sort of evolving what it is that you know you want to do and are passionate about. Um, I want to know what your sort of top leadership principles would be for people who, really that generally people should be looking for and just constantly developing, right? You've already sort of alluded to some, but what are your top leadership principles?
Right. It's interesting that when I got out of Microsoft, I was presenting to different leadership principles that are used at Microsoft. And I was used it before with the leadership principles from IBM.
Mm-hmm.
And these things actually change over the years because we start seeing how our current employees are performing, what they're expecting from the companies, how we can find a good balance between the employees' personal life and professional life, and how we can actually give them motivation to continue doing the great work and still living their life, right? So when I got into Microsoft, I was so touched to the leadership principles that are used in here.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's not just because I work for Microsoft right now that I'm saying that. It's just because I feel it really resonates to Tiago's way of believing the way and how the leadership principles should be. And that's about the first, uh, clarity, how you create clarity. I
Mm-hmm.
found myself in the past uh, in different challenges, personally and professionally, and just lost. And sometimes you found you lost, and when you found yourself a loss in something that you were doing, you just feel that you are not being you are being actually useless. You think like you start just challenging yourself or asking yourself, "Am I really good in this?" And you just found that the lack of clarity is actually what leads people to think that they don't have a purpose of in life, right?
Mm-hmm.
In work. So I think the first one then is create clarity. Look
Mm-hmm.
for clarity. Ask your manager for clarity. Ask your executives for clarity. Let me know what exactly you want me to achieve. Have the clarity on purpose, clarity on expectations and mission, right? So you can exactly match the things that you're going to be doing to the mission of the company. The other thing is about generate energy. It's not hard to find on this particular period of time in which we have COVID around. Things were really tough for everyone, and the energy of everyone starts like lowing down, right? Start getting low and low and low, and start not having that energy and positivity of doing stuff, of thinking creativity. Um, so generate energy is really about how you can think more positively. Think that everything that you've learned before, right, and be thankful for the things that you've learned that have been applied for now, and have the energy, that level of energy really high to understand that you are valuable to the company, you are valuable to yourself, and the things that you've done in the past and the things that we're doing right now are actually really matters, right?
Mm-hmm.
So generate energy, it is all about over time how you develop the relationships that you have in the company and outside of the company, and bring people into your life that can actually help you be happy, right? Help you to understand that the things that you are doing really matters to the extent of your work and personal life. And the last thing is about results, drive to results. It's being driven to achieve results. Don't do the things just for the sake of doing. Think about how you can improve, how you can actually get to the next challenge. And that's a little bit what happened when we started here talking about,
Yeah.
my career. Think about the next step. You might not be able to think about what's going to happen in the next 5 years, 10 years, because it might be difficult for now, but think about the things that you can achieve this year, and then challenge yourself to think about the things that you can do in a couple of years, and be really driven by the results, right? Being results driven is really important because that gives you, that push you forward constantly, right? and frequently, and you need to be persistent. So I think these three leadership principles are really important: clarity, energy, and results.
Wonderful. Being clear on what you want to do, having that North Star metric of what you want to achieve is going to help you drive results. And along the way, you can do this much better if you're generating energy. Wonderful.
Exactly.
Thank you so much
Exactly.
for sharing. Thank you. This is very,
Sure.
very well said. And I mean, I gotta say that, as you mentioned around generating energy and, connecting with others and working with others, for example, the work that I do, right? It would have been absolutely
Mhm.
impossible for me to do all these different things if it weren't for the help of, my mentors, my friends, my family that actually sort of, enable me to do the kinds of things that I do, right? So as you mentioned, it's
Right.
it's all about that collaboration, knowing what it is that you want to do and working with that mindset of here's what I'm doing to get to this goal so that I can do this next thing, right? So that's what
Exactly.
it's all about.
Exactly.
Wonderful. Thank you very much once again for sharing. And now, again, any more
Sure.
questions that we weren't able to get to in the live stream, feel free to put those in the comments. We will make sure to get to them. But Tiago, one thing that I do want to ask you is, you've gotten a bit of a feel for our audience based off the questions they've asked us today. And I want to ask you, is there like a message that you want to leave them with today? And if so, what is that message?
I think there are two things that I may want to leave as a message to everybody that is in here, and I think it is around two questions. So I constantly receive when I'm mentoring someone, they ask me for advice, because they're starting their career or they want to change in their career, and they don't know on how to do that. They don't know on how build a plan that can help them progress through their career. So, so the first message then is that as you start your career, the first thing that you need to keep in mind is that every effort is worth. And working things that really reflect your passion will make you happy and give you that reason to wake up every day and work. And said that, I do have few things as an advice for those that are just starting or they want to progress in their career and looking for more purpose in their daily work. So the first one is that you got to make sure that you set goals and challenges that will really push you to become better on what you want to be seen as a good at, right? You don't want to be just seen as you are a new employee here where you just bring that thing that the others are bringing. No, you want actually to become better on what you think that you can be seen that you is very good at this, right? Goals need to be specific, measurable, and realistic. Don't set the goals that you know that you are not going to be able to achieve because there are other dependencies that are not under your control. Focus on things that are under your control, right? Experiment, right? Give yourself space for failing and applying the learnings to improve. keep I talk about growth mindset before in some of the questions, but keep a growth mindset to be a what I call as aimless learner, right? Don't assume that you don't you know everything, right? And it's okay to say I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
When I got on the team that I'm today and people were actually asking me about strategy and very complex stuff, I was like, I don't know. And it's okay to say I don't know, right? Because people feel how genuine you being to say I don't know, and that requires you a lot of courage. You'd say something, Tanmay?
Mm-hmm.
You'd say something,
No, I was just
Tanmay?
replying to a question from Raj
Right,
Tuliani here.
right. And the other thing is, listening to others. I think that we are all the time exercising that, but listening mindfully, right? It's very common to see some people actually listen to a conversation, but they are not listening mindfully. They are actually listening to defend themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's not good, right? Because you don't put yourself on the other's shoes, and that's really important these days. Have appropriate and consistent validations with yourself on what you want for your career, and if you have a manager, right, make it a topic during your one-on-ones.
Mm-hmm.
Look for there is another thing that I'm always doing, and especially when I have these conversations just like with you, Tomei. I look for fresh things that can motivate me, right? So look for fresh things that can motivate you as well, right? Um, and I said that before, express gratitude for what you achieved so far. It's
Mm-hmm.
really important to continue bringing the energy that I said before. Expressing gratitude is going to help you really get the energy really high on your daily work, and celebrate, right? Celebrate small wins
Mm-hmm.
as you progress. And on the top of that, repeat the process. It's really important to keep repeating that. So this is the first thing. And then the second message that I want to leave with this audience is that I'm all the time asked, what does success look like to me? And I do feel like people is, they expect that I'm gonna say, wow, you're gonna, when you get to that level or when you get to the position, you just reach success. Many people really link success with money or position. It's really common to see people saying that they will be successful when they reach that amount of money in life. Wow. Way, or then I would be successful when I become a VP of a particular company or a particular area. But to
Yeah.
me, no matter how much money you make, Tommy, no matter how much power you accumulate, these are not principles of success for me.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, success is um, it is when you have a professional and personal environment that really allow you to be in a loop that consistently make you learn, experiment, perform, struggle, and thrive. I have experienced that when I get in that loop and then I thrive, I feel so much energized that it gives me really the constant feeling
Yeah.
that I'm succeeding in life. And success is not the end of the road, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is the result of the growth from
Yes.
learnings that I've done. So that's the I think the closing message that I can think of.
There is so much wisdom that you shared with us today. I mean, thank you for doing this. I mean, there are a couple of highlights. Like for example, you mentioned having SMART goals, ones that are realistic, ones that are achievable, measurable, ones that you can actually put a time to and that are realistic. You mentioned being able to celebrate the small wins, right? That
Yeah,
you get and actually be excited about these things and making sure that you're genuinely listening to people and you're getting this constructive feedback and you're working on it and you're actually working with people and trying to get what they're trying to say to you. But I feel like what's most important, two things that really highlight that are really highlights for me are, first of all, you mentioned being grateful, having that gratitude for the things that you have or the people that you're able to work with, and that really, I mean, as you mentioned, it generates energy, right? It makes it
yeah,
so that you are generally better at just working with people and you're generally able to more appreciate the different things you're able to achieve. And then that ties right back into celebration, right? And then on
yeah.
top of that, being able to then keep experimenting and have that reason to say, every day I'm going to be learning something new. I'm going to be doing something I haven't done yet. I mean, I personally know that, like, every time I work on something new, there's always going to be some bit of experience that I'll apply from a very recent project, and sometimes I'll even be taken aback and be like, if I hadn't worked on that project, would I have even been able to solve this problem right now? And I just worked on that like a
Yes.
day ago. Like it's
Yeah.
every day you're always consistently learning new things,
Isn't that
and
nice?
exactly
That's
right.
that's really nice.
That's exactly what I love about working with technology too, is because things move so quickly, you're always learning something new. And particularly what I like about what you said is that so many people misrepresent what they think success is. It's not just at the end of the road, it's a binary classification. Were you a failure or a successful person? No, that's couldn't be further off from the truth.
No.
It is a
Yeah.
continuous cycle of just, are you happy? And usually what leads to, being happy or feeling like, you've been successful is, as you mentioned, that loop of learning, experimenting, performing, struggling, and
Yeah.
thriving, right? It's that consistent loop. Some people might think, oh, it's because of money, but no, your money, your position, whatever it is, those are just proxies to then help you throughout that loop. And it's that loop that really
Right.
matters. And no matter how you get
Exactly.
to it, whether that's through the money that you have or whatever it could be. As long as you get to that loop, that's what success is really about, right? So I
Exactly.
feel like
Love
it's
it.
thank you. Yeah, I know this is it's been so fascinating to hear all of this from you. Thank you very much for sharing. I'm sure
Yeah, I'm
everybody joining
sorry.
the stream today has definitely learned a lot, and they will definitely keep this in mind in their careers and as they progress. So thank you very much for joining
Perfect.
today, and of course, thank you everybody on the
Thank you, Tanmay.
stream. Of course, for joining today. Make sure you join us next week. We'll be talking about some really fun, well, infrastructure behind artificial intelligence. We've already sort of alluded to what that infrastructure is, but next week we'll actually get to speak to the CEO of a company who builds this infrastructure for other companies to leverage. So it's going to be really fun. Make sure you join us next week, again, Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And so without any further ado, thank you very much, Thiago. Thank you everyone for joining in today, and goodbye,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.